What if the most powerful person on your flight was the one you overlooked? She wore no designer clothes, carried no fancy luggage, said very little. But what happened to her aboard Flight 994 would send shockwaves through an entire airline. Because the woman everyone dismissed held the final signature on a $900 million deal. This isn't just a story about mistaken identity. It's a powerful reminder that dignity isn't something you earn by looking the part. It's something you're owed simply by being human. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and get ready for a story that will make you think twice about how we treat one another. If this touches your heart, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. And make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that matters. Now, let's begin. At 5:27 a.m., the first light of dawn had barely crept over the Los Angeles skyline when Elena Brooks stepped out of the rideshare and onto the sidewalk at LAX. She moved with quiet purpose, her steps steady, though nothing about her presence screamed importance. She wore a weathered leather jacket, the kind that had seen decades of use in stories. Her jeans were faded, her sneakers practical, not flashy. Her hair was pulled into a low, no-nonsense bun, and round glasses framed a face that didn't ask for attention, but somehow held it anyway. Over one shoulder hung a canvas backpack. No wheels, no monograms, no sleek aluminum cases like the ones being dragged around her. She didn't carry a boarding pass in a leather folio, didn't wear a smartwatch buzzing with gate updates. Just a phone, a folded printout, and a sense of calm that didn't quite fit the bustle around her. Elena blended in, and that was exactly the point. To anyone watching, she looked like an early traveler on a discount ticket. Maybe someone flying last minute to visit family. Not the kind of person you'd expect to be flying first class, let alone someone whose signature could shift the balance of a $4.1 billion merger. But appearances deceive, and Elena had made a career of letting them. Her name didn't appear on headlines or business blogs. But inside a quiet boardroom in Manhattan, the leadership of Westbridge Global Capital knew exactly who she was: senior compliance advisor, the person trusted with final oversight on the most sensitive investment decisions, the invisible thread between power and discretion. And today, Elena wasn't flying for comfort. She wasn't traveling for business meetings or press announcements. She was flying undercover, anonymously inserted into the very system her firm was about to invest in, to experience firsthand what the quarterly reports couldn't show. Not metrics, not stock performance, but people, and how those people, gate agents, flight crews, corporate staff, treated someone they assumed didn't belong. Westbridge had recently acquired a 37% stake in a new airline alliance between 3 domestic carriers. The merger promised sweeping change in regional travel, consolidated routes, streamlined service, record profits. But buried beneath the financial forecast was a growing concern: rising complaints of profiling, uneven treatment, and customer service disparities too consistent to be random. So a decision had been made, not to send a report, but a person. Elena's mission wasn't written down. It was whispered in a closed-door meeting and sealed inside a white envelope tucked deep in her backpack. She wouldn't flash credentials. She wouldn't correct anyone. She would observe, document, and verify the truth the numbers couldn't see. And by the time the truth was revealed, it wouldn't be loud. It would be undeniable. As she stepped inside the terminal, pausing only to scan her surroundings, Elena didn't look like someone who could alter the course of an entire industry. But by the time this flight landed, someone would wish they had looked twice. The check-in area was already humming when Elena stepped into the terminal. Overhead announcements echoed in gentle loops: gate changes, boarding groups, last calls for missing passengers. Fluorescent lighting buzzed softly above her as she navigated past bleary-eyed travelers, sipping burnt coffee and clutching overstuffed tote bags. She moved toward the first class and priority access counter, her posture relaxed, her steps unrushed. There were only 3 people ahead of her: a man in a navy pinstripe suit, a woman in heels clicking impatiently, and a young couple with designer luggage and matching travel pillows. The agent behind the counter, young, slim, perfectly groomed with a name tag that read Jordan, smiled warmly at the suit, laughed at the couple's joke, and leaned over with faux concern as the woman in heels fumbled for her passport. But when Elena reached the front of the line, the energy changed. Jordan's smile cooled, only slightly but noticeably. His eyes flicked to her canvas backpack, then her shoes. Then he looked her in the eye with a kind of polite suspicion, not overt, but unmistakable. "Yes?" he asked, tone clipped. Not "how can I help you?" Not "good morning." Just that single syllable, already skeptical. Elena held up her phone calmly, screen displaying a barcode glowing in blue and gold. First class, LAX to Toronto, seat 2A. Jordan leaned forward but didn't immediately scan it. "This lane's for first class and executive preferred," he said slowly, as if explaining something. "I know," Elena replied gently. "That's my ticket." Jordan hesitated, just long enough to be telling. Then he scanned the barcode and the little beep it produced seemed louder than usual. He glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, and then without saying a word reached under the desk. A quiet vibration buzzed through his radio. Elena noticed. Behind her, someone in line sighed audibly. Jordan finally looked back up. "One moment, please," he said, voice now overly formal. He reached for a nearby receiver and whispered something low, almost inaudible. But Elena caught the words "visual mismatch." Within seconds, another staff member approached from a side hallway. She was older with tight features and a stiff blazer. Her name tag read Sharon, check-in supervisor. She walked over like someone answering a security call, not a customer service need. "What's the issue?" she asked, looking only at Jordan. Jordan handed her the scanner. "Passenger claims first class," he said without looking at Elena. Sharon finally turned. "Can I see your ID, please?" she asked. Elena nodded. "Of course." She pulled out her passport and boarding confirmation again. Sharon examined them longer than necessary, flipping through pages of the passport as if searching for something suspicious. "I'll have to verify this manually," Sharon said flatly. "We've had some guests use expired upgrades or point sharing recently." Elena said nothing. She simply stepped aside, letting them run their process. But behind the desk, something else was happening. A younger agent, barely 20, face lit by the glow of his phone, snapped a photo of Elena's back as she waited. With a smirk, he typed into the staff group chat, "Guess who thinks she's rich today? Mere seat 2A. He thought she wouldn't notice. But Elena had worked in finance long enough to recognize when someone held a phone like that. Not for checking messages, but for sneaking a photo. She didn't say a word. She just watched, silently. A few minutes passed. The couple with the travel pillows were long gone. The man in the suit was already walking toward the TSA line, and Elena still stood there, waiting for Sharon to verify what a simple scan had already confirmed. Sharon finally returned. "Fine," she said, barely concealing her irritation. "You can proceed." Elena gave a polite nod. "Thank you." But before she could take 2 steps, a different voice called out from behind. "Ma'am, would you mind stepping over here for a quick security screen?" It wasn't TSA. It was airport security, level 1, the kind typically used for random checks. The officer, a man in his 40s with kind eyes but an uncomfortable posture, motioned to a small table set just off the main path. "It's just a quick inspection of your carry-on," he added almost apologetically. Elena glanced around. No one else from first class had been pulled. Not the suit, not the couple, not the woman in heels. Just her. She unzipped her backpack slowly, laying it flat. Inside were only essentials: a book, travel-size lotion, a toothbrush, a charging cable, and a sealed white envelope she didn't touch. The officer glanced at it but didn't ask. Instead, he leaned in closer to Sharon, who had lingered nearby. "She traveling alone?" he asked in a whisper he assumed Elena couldn't hear. "Yep," Sharon replied with a shrug. "Looks like one of those upgrades from a friend situations." The officer nodded silently, as if that explained everything. They didn't find anything, of course. Elena's bag was clean, her boarding pass valid, her ID flawless. But it wasn't about finding anything. It was about reminding her that she was being watched. As Elena zipped her bag back up, Jordan called after her, now pretending to be helpful. "Gate C18, ma'am. You can follow the sign down the escalator." He smiled again, but this time there was smugness behind it, a sense of victory for having slowed her down. Not denied, just delayed. And Elena understood something deeply familiar in that moment. The system didn't always need to say no. It just needed to make her feel like yes was a stretch. The steps she took toward the TSA pre-check line were calm, quiet even, but inside her chest something was shifting. Not anger, not panic, just confirmation. They didn't know who she was, and that was fine, because that meant every decision they made was honest. A reflection not of what she was worth, but what they believed she was not. And that, she knew, was more powerful than any stage welcome. As she neared the security line, her phone vibrated softly. A notification popped up from an encrypted app, one used only for internal audits at Westbridge Global. Live monitoring engaged, incident log started at check-in. Subject, Elena Brooks. The camera in her bag had recorded the moment the agent took her picture. The audio was already being transcribed. The facial recognition software had flagged Jordan and Sharon's names. She didn't need revenge. She needed documentation, and that was already underway. The cabin air was cool and filtered, the kind of climate-controlled comfort designed to lull passengers into believing everything was under control. Elena stepped onto the aircraft with a smooth gait, offering a polite nod to the flight attendant posted at the doorway. He smiled in return, a little too briefly, and glanced at her boarding pass but didn't really read it. "First class is to the left," he said, as if he wasn't quite expecting her to go there. Elena gave a quiet nod. "I know." The first-class cabin was serene. Leather seats, chrome fixtures, ambient blue lighting. Each seat was arranged like a private cove, with oversized armrests in storage compartments that closed with the hush of money. But even here, where comfort was engineered into the very design, something felt cold. Her seat, 2A, was by the window. She placed her canvas backpack beneath the seat in front of her and gently slid into place, letting the leather mold to her frame. Across the aisle, a man in his 50s with Bluetooth earbuds and a monogrammed briefcase gave her a once-over. Not rude, just curious. Then he looked away, uninterested. A moment later, a flight attendant approached with a tray of hot towels, the pre-flight ritual of refreshment and elegance. She offered one to 1A, smiled at 2B, then skipped Elena entirely. The tray passed right by her, like a ghost ignoring the living. Elena didn't react, not outwardly. She simply folded her hands in her lap, fingers brushing lightly against the tiny object embedded in her keychain. A hidden lens, no bigger than a button. She'd activated it earlier. Now it was watching everything. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Passengers chatted quietly, unwrapped newspapers, scrolled through their phones. A baby in the back fussed, but was quickly hushed by a soothing parent in a warm blanket. Another attendant began offering pre-flight drinks. "Would you like water, juice, or sparkling wine?" she asked the woman in 1B. Elena waited her turn, but when the attendant reached her row, she hesitated, glanced down at her tablet, then leaned toward her colleague, a tall woman with an immaculate bun and a name tag that read Sloan, the lead flight attendant. Sloan barely looked up. "Not platinum," she whispered. The younger attendant turned back to Elena, smiled weakly, and kept walking. Across the aisle, 2B, the businessman with the earbuds, received a glass of sparkling water in a stemmed glass. Elena watched the condensation bead and slide down the side of the glass. Her mouth was dry, but she didn't ask. Not yet. Not until the game became obvious. "Excuse me," she said quietly a few minutes later, catching Sloan as she passed by. "May I see the menu?" Sloan paused, her expression unreadable. She leaned toward another crew member and said, barely above a whisper, "She's not coded. No comp meal." Elena heard it. She always did. Sloan turned back, smiled professionally. "I'll check," she said. But she didn't. Instead, she resumed service to the rest of the cabin. Men in tailored suits, a woman in a cashmere shawl, a couple sipping orange juice with their fingers intertwined. Everyone received menus, everyone but her. Then came the comment, loud, deliberate. From the back of the cabin, a heavyset man in khaki pants and a university logo sweatshirt leaned forward and said, half laughing, half sneering, "Another one of those point hustlers, huh? They give first class away like candy these days." A few chuckles followed. Not cruel, just complicit. Sloane smiled at him, not at Elena. Elena remained perfectly still, her back straight, her eyes on the window. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. Instead, with practiced subtlety, her thumb slid over the back of her keychain, pressing a second time. Audio activation on. This wasn't about getting angry. It was about getting everything on record. Dinner service began not long after takeoff. Sloane moved through the rows with grace, stopping at 1A and 1B to describe the options. Miso glazed cod or herb roasted chicken, both served with warm bread, vegetables, and a petite dessert. She reached 2B, offered him the same, then walked past Elena. No offer, no explanation. Just an empty space where dignity used to live. Elena waited a moment, counted to 10, then 15, and finally said softly but clearly, "Was I skipped for meal service?" Sloane stopped, turned, tilted her head. "Oh," she said as if she just noticed her. "We weren't sure you were eligible. Sometimes these upgrades don't include full amenities. You'd be surprised how complicated these ticketing systems are." Elena met her gaze. "I'm not upgraded," she said. "I purchased this ticket. First class. Seat 2A. There was no rise in her voice, no edge, just clarity. Sloane's smile thinned. She tapped her tablet, pretending to check. "Ah, right. You're listed here. Sorry for the confusion. What would you prefer, cod or chicken?" "The cod," Elena answered, her voice still calm. Sloane nodded and disappeared. When the meal arrived, the plate was already cold. The cod was pale and dry, the rice gummy, the vegetables limp and watery. It was not a mistake. It was a message. Elena didn't touch the tray. She slid the lid back over it and pushed it gently forward on the table. Then she placed both hands back in her lap, her eyes fixed out the window at the stars streaking past at 35,000 feet. Across the aisle, 2B was already asking for his second glass of wine. A different attendant, one Elena hadn't seen before, walked by, paused, and glanced at her tray. "Didn't like the fish?" he asked kindly. Elena turned to him. He was young, nervous. "It was cold," she said simply. He nodded. "I'll let someone know." And he did. She saw him whisper to Sloane. Sloane's face tightened. She turned, glanced at Elena, then quickly turned away. No apology, no warmth, just frustration at being caught. The cabin lights dimmed for the evening. Blankets were passed out. Bottled water offered. Elena received neither. She didn't ask. She sat in silence, hands folded neatly over her lap. Every second of that silence was recording now. Every skipped service, every dismissive glance, every whisper. And beneath it all, Elena felt something far more disturbing than anger. Familiarity. This wasn't new. This was what bias looked like in luxury. It wore lipstick, spoke in policy, smiled with teeth but not with heart. She'd seen it in boardrooms, in restaurants, in banks. Now she saw it in row 2 of a 1,200 seat. And the worst part? It wasn't the treatment. It was how comfortable they all were doing it. As if it were routine. As if no one would notice. But someone was noticing. Back at Westbridge Global's East Coast office, the incident log pinged again. Footage from Elena's lens had already synced to a secure server. Sloane's face, her words, the laughter from row 5, the skipped tray, the false claim of upgrade, all of it. Not speculation, evidence. Elena leaned her head gently against the window, watching the darkness outside. Somewhere below, the Rockies slept beneath a blanket of snow. And next to her chest, inside her tote bag, the sealed envelope remained untouched, but heavy with consequence. She didn't want attention. She wanted accountability. And that, like turbulence, had a way of showing up when you least expected it. 37 minutes before landing, the hum of the cabin softened. Tray tables were locked back into place, blankets folded. Some passengers leaned into their windows, trying to spot the early lights of the city below. The atmosphere had shifted, still quiet, still polite, but with the kind of tension that builds right before a curtain drops. Elena sat upright in seat 2A, her seatbelt neatly fastened, hands resting on her lap, her tote tucked beneath the seat. The sealed white envelope remained untouched, anchored like a quiet declaration beneath her folded hands. The half-eaten meal on her tray had long since been cleared. She hadn't asked for anything else. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. But apparently her silence had become a problem. Sloane approached again, this time without pretense. No cart, no water bottle, no smile, just posture, rigid, official, and draped in a kind of customer service tone that didn't warm, it warned. "Ms. Brooks," she began, using Elena's name for the first time since boarding, "we've received an update from the ground crew. There's been a minor adjustment in the cabin's weight distribution. For balance during landing, we'll need to relocate one passenger from the forward left section." Elena looked up slowly, studying Sloane's face. The words were clean, polished, approved, but the eyes, those told a different story, a familiar one. "And you've chosen me?" Elena asked, voice even. Sloane nodded. "It's strictly protocol, ma'am. Nothing personal." "That's convenient," Elena replied gently, "because it feels personal." The two women stared at each other for a beat longer than normal. Sloane broke first, her tone tightening. "We'd like to move you to 17D. You'll still have access to all first-class amenities." Elena blinked once. "You want to move me to a seat that doesn't exist in first class," she said. Sloane stiffened. "It's a recliner plus seat, premium economy." Elena exhaled, not in frustration, but in confirmation. "No." Sloane's expression didn't shift, but her shoulders squared slightly. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to just above a whisper. "Passengers who don't comply with flight crew instructions are logged," she said. "We're offering this as a courtesy." Elena didn't flinch. She looked past Sloane, out the window where city lights were just beginning to glow beneath the clouds, then turned back and said softly, "I'll stay where I am." The quietness of it landed heavier than a shout would have. Sloane opened her mouth to respond, paused, and then walked away. 5 minutes later, Elena noticed the change. Two men had boarded the flight in suits and loafers. No badges, no uniforms. They looked like consultants or auditors, but their posture said otherwise. One took a seat in row 3, the other leaned casually against the galley divider. They weren't part of the crew. They weren't passengers. They were observers, and they were watching her. Elena didn't panic. She noted. She observed the flick of their eyes when she shifted slightly in her seat, the way one of them adjusted his earpiece subtly, even though no one else had one. They were with airport security, probably a low-tier behavioral team trained to blend in, monitor, and de-escalate, or so they were trained to say. But this wasn't a de-escalation. This was a performance, and it wasn't for her. It was for the other passengers, to build a narrative before anyone asked questions. Row 2 had become tense. The man in 2B, who'd earlier received 2 drinks and an extra dessert, now sat quietly with one earbud removed. He glanced sideways at Elena, then toward the aisle where the plainclothes officer stood. He didn't speak, but his body shifted just enough to say, "Something's off." And he wasn't the only one. From farther down the cabin, 2 younger women in business attire whispered behind napkins. A teenage boy seated near row 4 turned in his seat, watching Elena with the raw curiosity of someone who'd seen enough viral videos to recognize the shape of an incident unfolding. And then came the moment that would crack the silence. A passenger, mid-30s, phone in hand, sitting across the aisle, began recording. No loud announcement, no confrontation, just a quiet tap on a phone screen, angling the lens toward row 2. The screen glowed briefly as he typed out a caption. "Why is this woman being followed by airline security?" He didn't know who she was, didn't know what she carried, but he knew what he saw. A black woman in first class, alone, being quietly surrounded. Elena could feel it now, the tension thickening in the air. Not rage, not chaos, just the slow creeping effect of a system performing its own defense, trying to reframe a decision that was already being questioned. She turned slightly toward the window again, her reflection faint in the glass. She looked calm, composed. She didn't feel calm, but she felt in control. Not because of any privilege granted to her, but because every interaction had been captured, archived, and streamed through her secure audit channel. Back at Westbridge Global Capital, the live incident report had already been tagged Pattern Escalation, Flight 894, Subject Code, Brooks E. The footage of Sloane's weight balance excuse had been flagged, the meal denial time-stamped, the skipped towel, the missed drink, the whisper to the junior crew member, and now, the attempted relocation, the plainclothes observers, each layer building on the last. Not loud, but damning. As the flight began its descent, a soft chime echoed overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Toronto. Please ensure your seatbacks are upright, tray tables stowed. Standard announcements. But Elena could see the two men shift again, one now fully focused on her, watching for any sudden movements. As if reclining her seat the wrong way might trigger something. She didn't move. She didn't need to. They were moving now, drawing attention, tightening the narrative, building the perception that she was unstable, or at least unpredictable. And all she had done was sit still. 15 minutes before landing, Sloane passed by again. This time she didn't look at Elena. She whispered something into her mic, then paused at row 5, nodding at one of the men. He stood, walked forward, stopped near the cockpit door, waiting. Elena looked down at the envelope in her lap. She hadn't touched it, not once. But its weight had grown, because now that envelope wasn't just documentation, it was witness to everything they'd tried to hide behind procedure, to the quiet stripping of dignity that was too subtle to make headlines, but too consistent to be accidental. As the landing gear dropped with a soft thud, Elena felt a chill creep up her spine. Not fear, preparation. The moment the wheels hit the tarmac, the man by the cockpit moved. The other stepped forward. Neither said a word, but their eyes said everything. They were waiting to escort her, not arrested, not accused, just flagged. The way systems like this flagged people who didn't conform, or worse, who didn't flinch. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers stood, stretched, fumbled for coats. Elena didn't move. The man from security leaned in discreetly. Ms. Brooks? She turned her head slightly. We'd like you to deplane with us first. Just a few things to verify. Is there an issue with my travel documents? She asked quietly. No, ma'am, he replied. We received a report regarding cabin behavior. Just protocol. She raised an eyebrow. Protocol tends to look a lot like assumption these days, she said. He didn't reply, just gestured toward the jet bridge. As Elena stood, she noticed the man with the phone, still recording. He didn't say a word. But when she met his eyes, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He'd seen it, and now so would the world. Elena walked calmly toward the front of the plane. No shouting, no resistance. Just the quiet strength of someone who had never needed to prove she belonged, but who had been tested every step of the way. As she crossed the threshold into the jet bridge, she didn't look back. She didn't have to. She already knew the story was no longer just hers. The walls in the auxiliary screening room were the color of weathered ash. Soft lighting buzzed overhead. Not harsh, not warm, just there. The kind of light designed to discourage emotion. A table sat in the center of the room. Too clean, too empty. On either side, stiff-backed chairs faced each other like chess pieces before the first move. Elena Brooks stepped inside without hesitation. She took her time, adjusting the strap of her canvas tote as the door shut quietly behind her. One of the plainclothes officers, the one who had walked beside her down the jet bridge, nodded at a woman seated behind the desk. Ms. Brooks, the woman said, not standing. Her tone was clipped, professional, practiced. My name is Dana Reyes. I'm the liaison for post-arrival compliance at Pearson Terminal. We just need to verify a few inconsistencies flagged by our in-flight crew. Inconsistencies, Elena repeated, her voice neutral. Yes, Reyes replied, turning her monitor slightly so Elena could see. On the screen was a digital log with highlighted entries. Passenger flag, 37C. Reason, uncooperative conduct. Possible reluctance to comply with cabin crew directives. Elevated monitoring advised. Reyes didn't say it out loud, but the implications hung in the air. Elena nodded once. She didn't ask who filed the report. She already knew. What do you need to verify? She asked. Your ID, Reyes said, and your ticket. Then we'll proceed with a behavioral log review. Elena reached into her tote with deliberate grace and removed her passport and boarding pass. She laid them gently on the table. Then with the same care, she pulled out a small black leather wallet, unremarkable in design but unmistakable in significance. She opened it and slid out a slim metal card, brushed in silver with black trim, engraved with a serial number and a name. Westbridge Global Capital. Tier 1 Authority, E. Brooks. Reyes blinked. The card looked official, because it was, but she didn't immediately recognize its weight. This is a corporate credential? She asked. Elena nodded. Not just corporate, regulatory. Reyes tilted her head. Elena reached into her bag again, this time retrieving a white envelope, sealed in red wax, embossed with the insignia of the U.S. Federal Compliance Council and Westbridge's legal arm. She laid it on the table beside the card, then calmly reached into the side pocket of her tote and pulled out a compact black device, smooth, matte, biometric enabled. It looked like a miniature tablet, but it was far more than that. She pressed her thumb against the top left corner. Click. The device powered on with no chime, just a pulse of green light. Elena tapped once, then twice. The screen flickered to life, displaying a secure dashboard. Reyes leaned forward. At the top of the interface in bold blue text was the header. Audit Protocol Active Subject. Brooks Elena, Tier 1. Compliance Observation Flight 994. Origin LAX. Destination Toronto. Classification, Field Verification Agent. Authority, Westbridge Holdings. Trust U.S. Stakeholder Oversight Access. 37% Equity Review Clearance. For the first time, Dana Reyes said nothing. The silence wasn't awkward. It was recalibrating. You see, Elena said softly, not unkindly, I wasn't just a passenger. I was the observer. And what I observed is now part of a federal compliance review of your airline's pending merger. Reyes looked down at the card again, then the envelope, then back at Elena. The incident flag, she began, stumbling slightly over her words, was filed by cabin crew. It's a standard precaution for behavioral patterns. Elena lifted a brow. Do you see any aggression logged? Raised voice? Refusal to follow safety instructions? Reyes hesitated. The report uses the word measured. Elena smiled dryly. Isn't that interesting? Measured. As in composed. Controlled. Apparently I wasn't loud enough to be safe. Reyes straightened in her chair. The air in the room had shifted. No longer procedural. Now it was defensive. Ms. Brooks, I wasn't informed of your assignment. If I had been, that's the point, Elena interrupted gently. You weren't supposed to be, because we needed to see how your systems responded to a woman like me. Without a press release, without a briefcase, without a boardroom title pinned to her coat. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her voice never rising above conversation. I wasn't here to test the plane. I was here to test the people. Reyes sat back, processing. Elena let the silence hold a few seconds longer before speaking again. I'd like to speak to your operations director, she said. Now. It didn't take long. When Eric Dempsey entered the room, he wore a navy sport coat over a half-unbuttoned dress shirt. No tie. His hair was neat, his smile trained, but it didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Brooks, he said, extending a hand she didn't take. We sincerely regret the confusion. This was clearly a breakdown in what? Elena asked, her tone level. Protocol? Or perception? Dempsey's mouth opened, then shut. She continued, I was denied service, questioned, bypassed, flagged, and tracked for walking to the restroom and declining a cold meal. Tell me, does that usually constitute passenger risk? He paused. Well, under certain behavioral codes. Which ones? She pressed. 37 degrees Celsius? The one reserved for passengers who exhibit non-compliant body language? You know what the data shows about who gets flagged under 37 degrees Celsius? Dempsey didn't answer. Elena tapped her screen again. The device synced wirelessly to her secure connection and pulled up a real-time incident report. She turned the screen toward him. This entire flight was monitored, not just by me, by Westbridge, the towel skips, the meal service, the whispered comments, the relocation attempt. Your crew didn't just make an error, they followed a pattern, and that pattern is going to cost your airline. Dempsey looked visibly paler now. I'm not authorized to discuss contractual implications, he stammered, but I'm sure our executive team will. They'll be receiving a briefing in 47 minutes, Elena said, standing now. But you won't be in that room, because your name's already been added to the incident ledger. Reyes's eyes widened slightly. Dempsey's mouth went dry. Elena slipped her credential card back into her wallet, gently closed the envelope, and powered down the audit device. Then, as calmly as she had entered, she walked to the door. But before leaving, she turned back one last time. I didn't come here for a seat, she said. I came here for a window, and now I've seen exactly what I needed to. She left the room in silence, the door clicking shut behind her with the kind of finality that doesn't echo. It just lands. The call came in at 4:41 p.m., exactly 18 minutes after Elena walked out of the auxiliary screening room. It wasn't flagged urgent. It didn't blare or buzz, but it landed with weight. The message blinked across the operations command screen in the senior control room at Terminal 3 of Pearson International. Sender, Genesis Compliance Network. Subject Audit Alert, Live Compliance Directive. Action, cease all operational intervention against subject, Elena Brooks. Tier 1 oversight status confirmed. Passenger is acting under verified fiduciary authority. Do not approach without executive clearance. Silence fell over the room. It started with one tech coordinator lowering his headset and blinking at the screen, confused. Then came a murmur from the compliance officer seated beside him. Another screen lit up, then another. Someone in the back reached for the red binder labeled Shareholder Incident Escalations, Domestic Carriers. They hadn't opened that in years. Within 60 seconds, the terminal's entire administrative tone shifted. Supervisors whispered. Compliance managers looked at one another with growing unease. One tried to make a call to someone at HQ, but no one picked up. Another opened a secure terminal and scrolled to the Genesis stakeholder list. There she was, Elena Brooks status, active role, Tier 1 contract authority, oversight access, Westbridge Holdings, voting power final authorization, acquisition file HAV0421, industry tag, airline consolidation, strategic ethics. The woman they had flagged, tracked, and dismissed as a problematic passenger was now confirmed as the final signatory on the $4.1 billion airline merger set to finalize within the week. She wasn't just someone with power. She was the one person whose signature would determine whether the merger happened at all. And every action taken against her, from denied towels to ignored boarding scans, had been recorded, compiled, delivered through a real-time audit feed to Genesis, Westbridge, and now federal compliance observers. No one in the room knew what to say, because nothing they said could undo what had already been done. In the corner of the command room, a large display screen blinked with another alert. It wasn't internal, it was social media. A video had just crossed 80,000 views in under an hour. The caption read, "Why is this black woman being followed by airport security after sitting in first class? #, first class. Bias." The clip was grainy but clear enough. Elena, calm and composed, being quietly shadowed by two plainclothes officers as she exited the plane. The video panned up to Sloan, the lead flight attendant, who looked directly into the lens and then turned away. The comment section was already on fire. She looks terrified but calm. What did they think she did? This is why we need real accountability. Where's the airline statement? Another day, another passenger of color treated like a threat. By 5:05 p.m., the video had been shared by 3 civil rights advocates, 2 travel bloggers, and a regional news anchor. By 5:30, it was trending. In the executive wing of the airport, a meeting was hastily assembled. 15 people squeezed into a glass-walled conference room designed for 8. Screens lit up along the back wall, showing snapshots of Elena's flight, the passenger roster, the compliance pings, and the social media fallout unfolding in real time. At the head of the table sat Lisa Halverson, the director of compliance ethics for Havenport Airlines, the airline whose merger was now hanging in the balance. Her expression was calm but tense. "This," she said, motioning toward the screen showing the Genesis directive, "is not a drill. Elena Brooks isn't just a compliance auditor. She is the final oversight on our merger with Havenport's 2 regional partners. Her authorization controls the release of $1.2 billion in equity funding." A man across the table swallowed hard. "She was flagged as a disruptive passenger," he muttered. "We didn't know." "You weren't supposed to know," Lisa interrupted sharply. "She flew anonymously. That was the test, and we failed it before the aircraft even left the ground." She clicked a remote. The video of Sloan bypassing Elena during meal service played silently. Then the recording of the weight balance excuse. Then Elena's calm refusal. "And now," Lisa said, "this is about to cost us more than a PR incident." Back on the main terminal floor, Sloan stood in the employee lounge, eyes glued to her phone. She hadn't been told anything official yet, but she'd seen the video. She recognized her own face, her own smirk. She knew the clip had gone viral. She knew who Elena really was now. Everyone did. Word spread through staff chat channels like wildfire. She had told herself earlier that it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe Elena was an upgraded traveler, maybe not entitled to the full first-class treatment. But now she couldn't hide from it. Her fingers hovered over her screen, rereading the same message over and over again. "Report to Ops Room 4B. Bring your flight log." She knew what that meant. In another part of the airport, Trent Maxwell, the check-in supervisor who had glanced once at Elena's ticket and redirected her, was mid-shift at another gate when his terminal suddenly locked him out. A red message appeared. "System access suspended. Pending internal ethics review." 30 seconds later, his earpiece buzzed. "Maxwell, report to Ops, now." He didn't argue. He just went. By 6:10 p.m., the operations room 4B looked like a tribunal. Sloan, Trent, and 4 other employees from Elena's flight sat in a row of folding chairs, eyes down, not speaking. Across from them stood Lisa Halverson. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You are not here because of a customer complaint," she began. "You're here because the woman you dismissed, bypassed, and quietly marginalized held the deciding vote on your employer's future." And she did not remain silent. She turned toward the screen behind her, where the audit footage now played side by side with the official service log. Dishonesty and timestamps, gaps in service, logged remarks that didn't match recorded interactions. Then came the kicker, voice transcripts from the crew channel, captured through internal comms. "She's not platinum. Skip her. Guess who's in 2A? Looks like a points fluke. Thinks she got in with a voucher. She's not a first-class fit." None of them said a word. Sloan felt her chest tighten as the words she thought had vanished now stared back at her in text and timestamp. "This," Lisa said coldly, "was not a lapse in service. It was an abuse of judgment." By 7 p.m., every employee tied to Flight 994 had been temporarily removed from duty, pending retraining and investigation. Sloan's badge was deactivated. Trent was formally suspended. And Elena? She had already left the terminal, quietly, efficiently, without a word to the press. But her audit dashboard was still active, and it had just flagged 4 more employees across 2 terminals for follow-up. Not to retaliate, but to correct. Because Elena hadn't come to punish individuals. She came to expose a culture, And now the culture was reacting the only way it knew how, when exposed to light. It blinked. The room smelled faintly of cedar and panic. It was the kind of space designed to inspire confidence. Glass walls, leather chairs, brushed steel fixtures, and a panoramic view of the tarmac below. On any other day, it might have hosted contract signings, shareholder presentations, or champagne toasts. But today, it felt like a courtroom. The executives were already seated when Elena Brooks walked in. 7 men, 2 women, all impeccably dressed, all with titles stitched into their resumes like armor. CEO, CFO, General Counsel, Head of Risk, PR Director, Regional Compliance Chair. Their eyes met hers with a mix of regret, calculation, and something they rarely experienced in this room. Unease. Elena didn't need an introduction. Her reputation had already arrived before her. She walked with the same quiet poise she'd shown from the boarding gate to the deplaning tunnel. Her leather jacket hung open now, revealing a simple navy blouse. No designer logos, no statement jewelry, just the silent confidence of someone who no longer had anything to prove. She sat at the head of the table, the chair usually reserved for the CEO. No one stopped her. No one even suggested she shouldn't. The CEO of Havenport Airlines, Richard Folsom, cleared his throat. "Ms. Brooks," he began, his voice polite but tight, "let me start by saying, we deeply regret what happened today. If we had known..." "That," Elena interrupted, her voice steady, "is precisely the problem." Folsom paused. His eyes flicked to the others around the table, but no one came to his aid. "You didn't know who I was," Elena said, "and so you made a decision, not based on behavior, not based on policy, but based on appearance, assumption." She leaned forward slightly, not as a threat, but as a woman reclaiming her space. "If you had known," she continued, "you would have greeted me at the gate, offered me champagne, pulled out a chair." Folsom opened his mouth to speak again, but she didn't give him the chance. "Instead," she said, "your system flagged me. Your staff humiliated me, and your brand, your billion-dollar brand, showed its true values." Silence followed, not the polite kind, the kind that tightens collars and makes wristwatches suddenly feel too snug. "I've read the transcripts," she said. "I've seen the internal chat logs. I've watched the footage, every skipped service, every whisper behind my back, every look of disbelief when I sat in a seat I paid for." She turned her gaze toward the woman at the far end of the table, Angela McKean, head of customer experience. "Your crew skipped my towel," Elena said, "then my drink, then my meal. Then they tried to move me to a different seat. Not because of policy, because of bias." Angela looked down. "I was calm," Elena continued. "I was compliant. I didn't raise my voice. But I didn't apologize for being there either. And that, apparently, was enough to be labeled a passenger of concern." She let the words sit in the air. Passenger of concern. "Ironic," she added, "because I was concerned too. Concerned by how comfortable your people were making me invisible." Folsom tried again. "Ms. Brooks, please understand. Your audit was not disclosed to us. We weren't prepared for a live assessment." "And the passengers who aren't auditors?" Elena asked quietly. "The ones who don't have federal clearance or direct oversight of your company's merger? How are they treated when no one's watching?" Folsom didn't answer, because everyone in the room already knew. Elena reached into her tote and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. The logo of Westbridge Global Capital sat in the top left corner. Under it, in bold font, Tier 1 Compliance Summary, Flight 994, Outcome Significant Deviation, Category Discretionary Bias, Systemic Recommended Action, Conditional Withdrawal of Stakeholder Approval. Murmurs erupted. Folsom looked like he'd been slapped. "That can't be your final decision," said the CFO, beads of sweat forming at his temple. "Ms. Brooks, we're 3 days from closing. We've spent 18 months preparing this deal." Elena raised an eyebrow. "I spent 5 hours watching how you run your culture," she replied, "and it told me more than your pitch deck ever could." Angela McKean finally spoke. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice strained. "Is there any way to rectify this?" Elena looked at her. "For me," she said, "no apology is necessary. I knew who I was when I boarded that plane." She paused, her voice softening. "But for the next woman who walks on looking like me, dressed like me, traveling alone, carrying no status on your loyalty program, you owe her better." Another silence. Then Elena stood. She left the compliance summary on the table. Then she added something else. A small black card. It bore no title, no contact info, just a single quote embossed in silver. "Character is how you treat those you think can do nothing for you." And beneath it, E. Brooks. She turned to go, but before reaching the door, she looked back. "I wasn't here to punish," she said, "but I needed you to see yourselves, clearly, without the uniform, without the name tag, without the seatbelt sign-on." She nodded once politely, then walked out, and this time they all stood. Not because they were trained to, but because they had finally recognized who was in the room. The statement came quietly, not with a press release, but through the company's own intranet. At 8:03 a.m., every employee of Havenport Airlines, from boardroom executives to ground crew, received an internal notification marked Urgent, Compliance Bulletin, Flight 9, 94 Audit Findings. Access level, all staff directive, mandatory review. Few had seen anything like it. The message opened with a single paragraph, no spin, no softened edges. On June 10th, 2025, a Tier 1 oversight agent flew under anonymized conditions aboard Flight 994. The purpose? To audit this company's live service culture against its stated diversity, equity, and passenger treatment standards. The results revealed measurable systemic bias across multiple service points and personnel decisions. Attached to the memo were clips, timestamps, and anonymized employee transcripts, all reviewed and verified by Genesis Compliance Network. But what struck most readers wasn't the data, it was what followed. Elena Brooks had issued a directive, not a demand, not revenge, just a measured, carefully outlined list of next steps. The entire Flight 994 cabin crew was to be temporarily suspended, pending a full internal review. Every team member involved in the check-in and in-flight process would be enrolled in a 6-week retraining initiative titled Equality by Exposure, designed to confront unconscious bias through direct cultural engagement. The entire audit, including errors, footage, and the outcome, would be published in full in Havenport's next internal newsletter, available to all 14,000 employees worldwide. Elena didn't ask for an apology. She didn't need one. Because accountability wasn't about words. It was about what changed after the words ran out. Inside Havenport's crisis room, Richard Folsom, the CEO who once dismissed her, read the final paragraph of her memo 3 times before looking up. "She didn't kill the deal," he murmured. Everyone in the room froze. He read again. "Final disbursement of the $900 million equity tranche will be withheld for 48 hours. During that time, I will observe, without introduction or interference, how your company treats its passengers, employees, and each other, now that you know who I am." It was signed simply, Elena Brooks, Oversight Agent, Westbridge Global Capital. Across the airline's executive board, the response was panic, and then something stranger, introspection. For years, the company had relied on numbers, earnings, upgrades, net promoter scores. Diversity, equity, and inclusion lived in brochures, not behaviors. But now they weren't being judged on metrics. They were being judged on human instinct, and they'd been found wanting. In the airport, the mood shifted. The same terminal where Elena had once been asked to open her bag for no reason now featured posters hastily mounted by HR. Respect isn't earned by appearances, it's expected by policy. Everyone in seat 2A. Bias has no boarding pass. Ground agents were being briefed. Flight attendants pulled into workshops. Regional managers stood in gate areas, not to monitor passengers, but to watch their own staff. Because they understood now, this wasn't about one woman, it was about what her treatment revealed. Sloan, the flight attendant, who had smirked at the idea of Elena ordering from the first-class menu, sat at home, laptop open, reading the bulletin like everyone else. She scrolled through the transcript of her own voice. "She's not platinum. Skip her. Just a point upgrade. Don't waste the wine." She'd said them like nothing, like air. But now, seeing them in writing, with time codes, context, and consequences, felt like a mirror she hadn't asked to look into. She closed the laptop, then opened her employee portal and signed up for the first session of Equality by Exposure. Not because she was told, because she wasn't proud of what she'd become. Meanwhile, Elena sat quietly at a small cafe near the waterfront, a modest croissant beside her tea. She wasn't reading the press or watching the reaction unfold. She didn't need to. She knew the impact had already taken root. For her, this was never about humiliation. It wasn't even about justice in the traditional sense. It was about revealing a system that functioned beautifully for those it was designed to serve, and cruelly for those it wasn't. Later that evening, she received a message through a secure Genesis channel. New employee chat room created by flight crew from Flight 994. Title, Starting Over. We didn't know. Most viewed thread, What we'll do different next time. Elena read it once, closed the app, and simply whispered, "Good." Because that was all she ever wanted. Not to be bowed to, not to be worshipped, but to be seen, and through her, help others be seen too. The next morning, a new video trended, not from an activist, not from a news outlet, but from one of the passengers who'd silently recorded Elena being followed by security. He had posted an update. He stood in front of the airport with his phone, eyes puffy from sleep. "Turns out," he said, "the woman in seat 2A was the most powerful person on the plane, not because of money, but because she didn't use it to crush anyone. She used it to hold up a mirror." He paused, then added, "And some of us didn't like what we saw." Hashtag number 2, a changed me. It went viral in under 3 hours. At the 47th hour, 1 hour before her deadline to sign off on the $900 million disbursement, Elena returned to her secure audit portal. A green button flashed, Authorize Transfer. But beside it was another option, one she had added manually. Delay for reassessment. She hovered her finger over the buttons, then chose neither. Instead, she logged into the company's public ethics feed and submitted a message to be delivered at the company's next leadership town hall. Culture doesn't shift with training. It shifts when those in power refuse to look away. Let this not be the moment we fixed a PR issue. Let this be the moment we proved we could be better, even when no one's watching. She didn't sign her name. She didn't need to, because now everyone knew who she was, and more importantly, they understood why she came. What we see when we don't know who's watching. In a world driven by status and appearances, this story reminds us that true character is revealed not when we know someone is important, but when we think they aren't. Elena Brooks boarded Flight 994 dressed simply, speaking softly, carrying no symbols of wealth or power. And for that, she was dismissed, mishandled, and quietly profiled. But Elena wasn't just a passenger. She was a silent observer, holding the future of the airline in her hands. Her story speaks to something deeper than corporate misconduct. It exposes the quiet assumptions we all make based on what someone wears, how they speak, or where they sit. It reveals how easily we can fall into judging others by what we see, instead of taking the time to understand who they are. For many older adults, this lesson feels familiar. We've lived through decades of social change. We remember when people were told to know their place, and some of us remember being on the receiving end of that judgment, passed over, overlooked, underestimated. What Elena did wasn't grand or dramatic. She didn't shout. She didn't seek revenge. Instead, she asked a powerful question. Now that you know who I am, will you still treat me the same? It's a question that challenges all of us, not just airline executives, but every person who interacts with others in public, in service, in passing. Do we extend kindness only to those we recognize? Do we give respect only to those we believe can return it? Or do we carry dignity as a constant, offered freely even to strangers? This story is about the dignity we all deserve, and the humility we must carry if we are ever to build a society rooted in fairness. Whether you're retired or still active, whether you once worked in the service or management, whether you've been looked over or lifted up, this story invites reflection, because sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the greatest power, and sometimes the way we treat them reveals far more about us than it does about them. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of moments in your own life, I invite you to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Have you ever been underestimated or seen someone judged too quickly? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another powerful, true-to-life story that speaks to the heart and reminds us of what truly matters. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.